do that? Okay. I will call to order the September 20th, 2023 meeting of the Pinellas County Charter Review Commission. I will go ahead and ask for a roll call, but during the roll call, if you would all just say your name and also who appointed you or how you became a member of the commission, so members of the public watching at home can know who we all are. And also, before you speak tonight, if you can be recognized by me and I'll introduce you, or you can introduce yourself so everyone knows who's speaking. And also the clerks can record the minutes. And whenever someone makes a motion or a second, if we make any motions or seconds tonight, I'll repeat the motion maker and who the second was so we can have a clear record of the meeting. Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed with the roll call. And I'm waiting on the clerk to do the roll call, or, okay?
It's okay if if we go around a circle and everybody could just each say their name.
Okay, so we'll just, we'll go counterclockwise. So Brian Onks, Chair, appointed by Commissioner Latvala.
Lindsay Grove, Vice Chair. I'm a public at-large citizen appointee.
Senator Nick DeSegli, Pinellas County Legislative Delegation appointee.
Dave Eggers, Pinellas County Commissioner, appointed by the County Commission.
Mark Strickland, appointed by Janet Long.
Rob Posovic, appointed by Commissioner Eggers.
Todd Jennings, Public at Large, Citizen Appointee.
Ashley Overend, appointed by Commissioner Brian Scott.
Ricky Butler, Commissioner appointed by Kathleen Peters.
Tom Steck, appointed by Commissioner Charlie Justice.
Anne Marie Brooks, Municipal Elected Official Appointee.
Mike Twitty, Constitutional Officer Appointee.
Doug Thomas, the CRC Facilitator.
Okay, and I know that Commissioner Scott is going to be joining us via Zoom, but we're actively sending her a Zoom link, so whenever she's able to join, staff, if you just let us know for the record that she's joined at that time. At this point, it's not on the agenda, but we will go to public comment. If you are a member of the public, you will have 3 minutes to provide us with your public comments. You can come right up to the podium here, and we ask that you fill out a comment card with the clerk, who is over there to my left. And you can fill out that card either before or after you make your comment, okay? And make sure you let us know your name and your address. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is David Ballard Geddes Jr. I live at 802 Georgia Avenue in Palm Harbor. The reclaimed water variance application states that I, the applicant, literally owe my health, my safety, and my religious convictions, and that this variance may prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards to assure such conformance to such literal owing. Based on Chapter 153 of the Florida statutes in support of the reclaimed water occupation, Statute 15303, Section 5, is claiming eminent domain of both my personal and real property, appropriating everything I own as a condition of receiving reclaimed water. And in supplement to such eminent domain process, Statute 170.03 takes all lands, water infrastructure, all property, all of my rights, to include my labor that is to be appropriated. Florida Statute 127.01 states each county of the state is delegated the authority to exercise the right and power of eminent domain unless, here's the catch, unless the county seeks to condemn a particular right in such property. So I ask about religion in particular. Does, as the county, as it moves forward on such hypocritical position as intended in the reclaimed water variance, do you intend, as the county, not honoring your own home rule charter in Section 2.02E, Section 2.02E of the Home Rule Charter states that my human rights are to be protected from discrimination based on religion. Not only does the Reclaimed Water Variance application violate Statute 127.01 and Home Rule Charter Section 2.02E, the variance is in violation of Florida Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, as the Reclaimed Water Variance is inconsistent with public morals and unjustly, it's clearly in violation of my religious freedom and rights as written therein. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states that Congress shall make no laws that abridges my right or my rights to exercise my religion as written therein. The Reclaimed Water Variance has exercised its freedom within its conduct that are inconsistent with constitutional morals and are woefully on the wrong side of justice and is in violation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ballergatis. And don't forget to fill out a card if you haven't yet, okay? And our next speaker, anyone else wish to make a public comment? Going once? Okay. We'll move on to the background and housekeeping information, item 4. I'm sorry, we need to approve the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes of August 16th? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Motion made by Senator Sigley.
Second, Mr. Chair.
Seconded by Mr. Butler. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, background and housekeeping information, item number 4. Mr. Doug Thomas, our facilitator. We're going to start with CRC member email addresses, item 4A.
Great. Well, thank you. First of all, good evening tonight. It's great to have everybody here. I wanted to spend a little time to just make sure that everyone was together in terms of communications and just general housekeeping type items. If you need me to connect that, I have to get a different device. Okay.
You don't have one, I have one.
Yeah, I have a converter, but if you can get it while I'm talking, that'd be great. Thank you. Apologize for that. The method is, as the CRC's legal counsel, Wade, had advised everyone at the last meeting. We're subject to the Open Records Act and Government of the Sunshine, all those various procedures. So as a result of that, the county staff, through their BTS, their technology division, had sent some information out to all of you about establishing your email addresses so that we could communicate through that fashion. I know I've spoken to a few folks, and I know the chair and I have also spoken. We had a bit of a kind of a just difficult handshake, if you will, to get those all connected. So I first wanted to find out if everyone has in fact activated those email accounts. And if not, maybe if you could just catch me before the end of the meeting, because we want to make sure we get you connected into that process, because that'll be our normal way of communicating with you for providing information and material and agenda material, things of that nature as well. And so just maybe by a show of hands, is there anyone that has not activated that email account? Good. Okay. So it sounds like at least those that are present today, we've done that. The other thing that I know a couple of us have encountered is right now it was very difficult to move that email address into one of your regular inboxes, if you will, so that you could kind of monitor it. Versus the way it's set up right now, you have to log into Office 365 every time. It's a two-factor analysis or two-factor process. So we are working with the BTS staff to see if we could resolve those issues. So, because I know most of you are probably not logging in on an ongoing basis to do that, probably just before the meeting. So we're going to try to make that a little bit more user-friendly. So stay tuned and to look for subsequent emails going forward in that regard. So we'll see if we can make that work for you a little bit better as well. The other piece that I want to identify is that to some extent we anticipate that you may very well, as members of the CRC, receive an email or an inquiry or something of that nature that might very well be something that you'd like to present that we could discuss to put together for a subsequent meeting topic or something of that nature. And so what I wanted to do is just to make sure when we send out the additional information for the email conversions and things that will make that easier for you, I'm going to be sending you some information about if you receive such an email, if you could forward that on to me so that we can get that into the record. We can then identify how that handles when Brian and I and the vice chair are in the process of developing an agenda from time to time as well. So just be sensitive to that item. There's also, if you want to, for your own purposes, to identify, in case you didn't want to necessarily receive those emails directly, we have a general email address, and this is also for the benefit of the folks that are maybe watching or listening online. We have a general CRC email address, which is charter.review@pinellas.gov. And that will then also go to staff and to me, and we'll be able to incorporate any of those comments going forward. So you're welcome to share that information through your various contacts and people that may be reaching out to you as well. I thought it would be helpful just in terms of some additional background to spend a little time just to show you what we've been working with staff to try to get the website for the Charter Review Commission up and running, and the type of information, just to make sure everybody was comfortable with what was there, or if you had additional items or issues that as we're working through this process to get you up and running. So what I've done is bring this up right now. You can see the Charter Review Commission website. We have identified all of the upcoming meetings. So obviously the first one at the top at 9:20 has the meeting date. It's on the calendar. As I understand, that also shows up on the county calendar system. So anybody that might be looking at the BOCC or Pinellas County as a whole, they will see this agenda item or this meeting occurring on the county, overall county calendar as well. But we have our own website through the county subpage here. And that would include upcoming meetings. We will have the agenda material and all the other associated information as access points for individuals that may be wanting to acquire that information ahead of the meeting. We also have as you know, we adopted a resolution for the first 4 meetings that would be in this room at 6 o'clock on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. So those calendar appointments are there, and they will get populated with additional information going forward. There was a question, I think, Commissioner Egger, you had raised about YouTube and having that available. We've provided the appropriate links, or your staff has done that on this website. So our hope is this really becomes the font for access points for people that may want to access information, look at previous minutes, material, presentations, whatever that may look and feel like as well. So in addition to the agendas there, we'll have the links to the videos. There's information about all of you who have been appointed in case there's individuals wanting to look at that. And then we have the public participation piece that you adopted at your last meeting, which was something I think that Wade had prepared and you had adopted going forward, or you had touched, I guess, Wade. I don't know if you actually prepared that or a staff prepared that. There was staff on that one. Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to address as it relates to that, we discussed the possibility. We've certainly had an opportunity for CRC members who may not be able to be here for conflicts about participating remotely. And we've got Terry is actually with us this evening in that fashion. One of the things that I wanted to ask, because it will become a challenge to potentially relocate these meetings elsewhere. I think there was a comment raised at the last meeting about the possibility of could we move these meetings around in different parts of the county. And so in talking with your technology staff and talking with the county staff as well, Pinellas County has really designed this room to accommodate these types of meetings. And they actually have another meeting that occurs in the morning, and the same staff that's here tonight has to be prepped for that meeting. It gets to be a bit of a challenge to relocate these to other parts of the county because of bandwidth and technology and staff and things of that nature. So one of the things under the public participation piece, if in fact we're not able to really move these meetings around to different locations, was the concept of allowing people to participate remotely via Zoom or something of that fashion, similar to what we've done with tonight. So I just wanted to talk through that, if there was any concerns or questions, or if anyone still had wanted to talk through the ability of potentially moving these locations. We have staff here that can address that question. So I guess first and foremost, what's your thoughts about allowing people to participate remotely via Zoom so they could at least monitor the meeting, and then if it's a public comment, there would be an opportunity to take them at the appropriate time.
So Mr. Thomas, my understanding is that the Magnolia Room is no longer set up with this type of equipment. That was the room that was used at Botanical Gardens during the COVID period. One of the locations that has been kind of floated but would require cooperation from our partner would be City of St. Petersburg City Hall. My guess is that we're probably not going to really need to move around the county until we have more concrete ideas of what some of the proposals might be. So I'm not extremely concerned about nailing down those logistics tonight for meetings that'll probably happen more in the 2024 timeframe. But I do think for me it would be good to have at least one South County location that we can go to in that 2024 timeframe when we have more of a menu of ideas of these are the types of things that we're talking about. That's my personal feeling. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Senator DeSegli?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you. I think right now, until we get some substance going on with what we're ultimately going to be deciding on potentially, until we get to that point, I think we're good here, but I also think it's appropriate for us to explore South County, St. Petersburg, North County. It's difficult to drive and travel around this county sometimes, as we all know. And so I'd like to us to be a little bit more flexible in the future once we have these specific items to discuss across the county, because I want to make sure that our public has access to these meetings and what we're ultimately going to be deciding on.
Commissioner Eggers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Maybe taking one in South County. And I think on the idea of getting public input, I'm always lean in favor of overdoing it rather than underdoing it. So I have no problem having virtual access when we're here, when we're South County or anywhere else. What works really well is we require that they register. It works well at the county commission meetings is they register the day before by 5 o'clock so that they have the ability then to speak on a Wednesday, or in this case it would be Tuesday night at 5 o'clock, and then they would have the ability to speak at night. So it's pre-registration. They've got it set up already, so I think that would work well, and that way it keeps people having to think ahead a little bit, and it doesn't spontaneous calls that just kind of people get irritated about something. They can still come down here and speak, but it gives an alternative. So,
yes, Commissioner.
Thanks, Commissioner. We can certainly host at the college if you are looking for a venue. We have the means, the technology, et cetera. We've previously hosted delegations, and this is not foreign to us. So we do have right smack dab in the middle is the campus I oversee is Seminole, but we have Health Center, we have Gibbs, we have lots of locations that if this body wants to meet in public and have student involvement or public involvement, we can certainly accommodate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Strickland. That would be St. Petersburg College for those of you watching. And so what I would suggest is let's have the staff work with Commissioner Strickland to see if we can identify some facilities. I mean, Seminole would be a great location. I know you have facilities further south, and then you have a facility in Tarpon. So those three would be great. So if we could have staff maybe do that groundwork now so that we're not scrambling around in March or May or whenever we're going to be doing these meetings. And then I don't know if y'all want to reach out to St. Pete as well, because I'm sure that they have facilities, not just City Hall. I'm sure they have other facilities that can host these types of meetings. I know there's that big conference room just on the ground floor of City Hall that sometimes hosts city council committee hearings and things of that nature. But between St. Petersburg College, we might just have it all solved there. So thank you, Commissioner Strickland, for that offer. Any other comments or? Yes, Commissioner Eggers, please.
Just a question on the, I know that the meetings tonight are being televised. If we travel, does that ability still hold, or are we giving that up in exchange for being in a community?
I think the reason, Commissioner, that there was concern about the setup was to make sure that they were televised. But once again, I think based on the direction we've got, why don't we have staff work through that, and we can come back perhaps at our next meeting to be able to say what's possible, what isn't possible to address that point. But the goal here was to try to be responsive to the issue of allowing as many people to participate in whatever fashion might be possible.
Do we need to decide on the item of accessing
I would like the Zoom or the remote access. And what we've tried to do in working with your staff is whatever you have traditionally done here in Pinellas County, we're trying not to do recommend anything different, because your residents and your folks and stakeholders are familiar with that process. So if the protocol is by 5 o'clock the day before, in order to do that, I would recommend you try not to do something different, just so people are familiar with the same processes. But yes, if there's a desire with the chair's discussion to approve remote access under those scenarios, that would be appreciated.
Is everyone comfortable with adopting the Pinellas County Commission's procedure for remote participation? Do we might as well make a motion? Motion by Commissioner Eggers, second by Senator DeSegli. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, let the record reflect that was unanimous, and Commissioner Scott also voted aye via Zoom.
Okay.
And it's good to see you, Commissioner. I'm glad you got the link finally, so sorry for that.
We will take care of working with your staff to update that under the public participation section as well, so that we have that on the website. And then just lastly, to go through the process, as meetings occur, we will have the material put there for past meetings. So as I say, this is going to be the repository of all of our work going forward. So if you want to use this as a resource for any people that may want to reach out to you individually as a member for access points and things of that nature, it also includes what took place in the previous effort into 2015 that led to the 2016 ballot initiatives from there. So. Okay.
Any questions for Mr. Thomas on things we've discussed so far? All right, thank you.
All right, my recommendation then, I'm going to hand it over to Wade, who is going to go through an overview of the charter. We felt that it was appropriate to do that to start things off, and he will carry us all the way through the review of the 2016 charter review proposals and the outcomes.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
I
Commissioner
have
Byrne.
a question related to what Commissioner Eggers was saying. The commissioners also usually vote board members in for virtual participation. I was trying to pull up our rules, but I haven't done it fast enough. Do we need to vote that in?
I can address that.
Yeah, go ahead, Attorney Vos. Good question, thank you.
Yes, so under the rules you all adopted a set of basically pre-authorized bases for extraordinary circumstances to allow in. Those were illness, pandemic or public health concerns, unavoidable business-related absence, absence of state legislature when legislature is in session. And the commissioner had advised staff that she was coming in remotely as a result of an unavoidable business-related absence. What the rules require is that if it's an extraordinary circumstance outside of the enumerated ones, you would vote them in. Commissioners, good evening. Give me just 1 second here. We'll get myself all hooked up. Outstanding. Commissioners, when we were listening to your discussion at your last meeting, there were a number of different ideas about going through the charter section by section, each meeting, one section, or one article this, one article that. Others not wanting to do that at all. We decided to meet in the middle and do something that we actually ended up finding very productive up in Alachua County in 2019 and 2020. We didn't do this last time with the Pinellas County Charter Review Commission. They kind of dove directly into issues. But what we found useful when I was doing my work up in Alachua was actually me going ahead and just leading a very brief tour, if you will, through the charter to walk through the very basics of what's going on in here. Give a little education for folks who may not know kind of some of the whys and wherefores of some of the things we have in there, just to give you some ideas of the types of things a county charter might work on, might fool with, or what have you. And so I'm going to be going through pretty quickly. I'm going to try to talk quickly so I don't bore you and spend all night doing it. Chair, with your leave, I would love to answer questions if there are particular questions that pop up during this. So if there's no problem, I'd love folks to be able to just jump in and ask some questions.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Particularly, I don't want someone to forget if you move on from a topic to some other topic. So if you have a question during the presentation, just raise your hand and I'll make sure we address it. Thank you.
Outstanding. And I actually have this coordinated with a paper copy. You all have a paper copy of the charter in your agenda materials that have been handed out. If you want to follow along at all, I will try to keep up on this. I have this up here primarily because if we want to drill down on any particular language, if anybody has any questions, we might be doing that. I'm going to go ahead and start actually with the preamble. These are usually just nice, flowery words, often in a lot of charters, but there's a little bit of history to understand here in the first whereas clause. And it references the fact that back before the establishment of the charter in 1980, in Pinellas County, there was a combination of general laws of local application, which apply only to Pinellas County, and special laws, which all came from the legislature. What I've found over the years is that generally around the state, and particularly in Pinellas County, there is a spiderweb of laws that have been passed over the decades that govern different little pieces of local government in a given county. That seems to be historically particularly endemic here in Pinellas County. And one of the goals in the legislature putting forward this charter, and this charter is one of the few in the state that was actually passed by the legislature as a special act, was to consolidate a number of those things all into a single document that then the county would have home rule authority to modify as they would see fit. Moving on down to Article 1, these are common provisions you see in a charter, just establishing the county as its own entity that can sue and be sued, establishing its name. I've been asked before whether you can change your name by charter amendment, and the general opinion I've gathered, even though there's nothing in the Florida Constitution that would prohibit it, is that you probably can't unless you're Miami-Dade County. And again, I'll say unless Miami-Dade County a number of times throughout this entire process over the next many months. It also notes here that the county seat shall be as presently designated by law. In 2015-2016, I was asked, can we change the county seat from Clearwater to somewhere else in the county charter? And after researching the issue, I advised that Charter Review Commission that the charter cannot. The Florida Constitution actually expressly says that county seats can only be changed as provided by general law. The county charter is not a general law. If Chapter 138 of the Florida statute said you could do it by charter, then you could, but it doesn't. Moving on down to Article 2, another instance where you see some very common provisions, but important ones. County shall have all powers of local self-government not inconsistent with general law, with special law approved by a vote of the electors, or with this charter. Most of that sentence is a copy and paste directly from the portion of the Florida Constitution in Article 8 relating to charter counties. It adds on at the end, or with this charter, because by that time, the case law recognized that county charters can actually impose additional limitations on a charter county than those that state law may have put on it. So this is just an encapsulation of the general power that is granted to charter counties. Moving further, a very interesting provision in Pinellas County's charter. And it deals with a fundamental issue, one of the fundamental powers of county charters and charter counties in Florida, and that is the preeminence of a municipal ordinance versus a county ordinance in the event of a conflict. The default in a non-charter county is a municipal ordinance prevails over a county ordinance in the event of a conflict. In a charter county, it is whichever ordinance prevails is what is specified in the county charter. So what you will find in a number of charters throughout the state is they will specify for certain subject matters, county ordinances will prevail over municipal ordinances in the event of a conflict. And then the default otherwise is that municipal ordinances would prevail. Pinellas County's is very interesting. One of the themes you will see multiple times throughout this charter is protection of municipal power, all right? The municipalities in Pinellas County were very keen, as far as I can observe from afar, to preserve their power such that the county charter would not be an avenue to overly invade into their authority on a number of different issues. We're going to get to a number of issues where matters were basically specified to be of countywide concern, but generally what's going on here is a pretty strong restriction to kind of lock in to some degree, and there might be some moving around. We had some discussion on this in 15-16 with a little complexity. Basically, some protections for those municipalities to try to provide stopgaps for being able to amend this charter to add additional instances where a county ordinance can prevail over municipal. Moving on down to security of rights of citizens. It's a common provision you see in a lot of county charters enumerating different subject matters that the legislative body, the Board of County Commissioners, is required to legislate on or address upon the institution of charter government. We have prohibition of conflicts of interest, just and equitable taxation. This is basically in the taxation a protection for municipalities to specify that in no way can this charter allow the county to claim any of the city's 10 mil taxing power. I want to mention something here. Charter counties cannot touch any of a city's 10 mil taxing power in at least at least 19 of the 20 charter counties. You'll find a number of instances as we go through this charter. I will mention that provisions were put into this charter, it seems to me, as belt and suspenders protections. You have to remember, this was proposed in and instituted in 1980. The Florida Constitution had only been amended back in 1968 to create the concept of charter government generally for counties throughout the state. We'd only had about probably 10 years at that time of development of case law. During that time in the 1970s, the Florida Supreme Court and a lot of the appellate courts, they were very liberally interpreting the powers of charter government at that time. They were, frankly, looking at the example of Dade County and looking at the powers of that county charter and saying, hey, if Miami-Dade has that power, or Dade County then, has that power, then maybe other charter counties have that power. And they read in a number of those. They had not read in the power to involuntarily take any of those 10 mills from a municipality, but they thought they might. And so I think this and a number of other provisions were put in this charter back in 1980 to protect against that direction. Proper use of public property, very common, of course, compliance with public records, protection of human rights, and requiring protection of human rights for discrimination based on a number of bases listed there, and protection of consumer rights. General provision requiring that all the powers of the county have to be exercised in accordance with the charter and executed by ordinance, resolution, or action of the Board of County Commissioners unless there's provision otherwise. Moving on to the special powers of the county. This is an interesting one. Now, the general trend when you establish a charter county government nowadays is you say, charter county has all powers of local self-government except as prohibited by general law or special law approved by the voters, and that basically means everything, or everything you can do, all right? What we have here is an enumeration. Now, what is the value of this enumeration? It is not a limitation, because there's some catch-all language here that says they have all the powers they would have. These are particular enumerations. Some of them, I would suggest to you, have the magic powers, if you will, still of special law. Remember, this was passed as a special law by the legislature. And so some of these things can really only be granted by special law. And they're the type of thing that you would really be wary to amend to take out of your charter, because you probably can't put it back to get that power back. By the way, I forgot to give my little caveat for the public and for anyone watching. Anything I say as I go through any of this is, of course, not the official position of the Pinellas County Attorney's Office. Obviously, it's not necessarily the official position of the CRC. I'm just an attorney who's providing legal advice to you all. Because I do have some commentary as we go through any of this, and quite frankly, sometimes when you get into the weeds and get into the details, there might be some tweaks to the general thoughts I offer. As we look down this list, there are some that are relatively ordinary, very common to find within counties. The county would develop and operate countywide 911 emergency communication systems and so on. But some of them are just enumerations of what are already county requirements under Florida law. For example, the development and implementation of emergency management programs is an obligation of counties under Chapter 252. There are some interesting provisions in here that I have always read to mean that there is an easier opportunity for the transfer of functions and powers among local government entities, among the counties and the municipalities, if both governing bodies agree without having to have a dual referendum with regard to it. And again, that gets very much into the weeds of Article 8, Section 4 of the Florida Constitution. If we want to talk about transfer of services versus transfer of regulatory authority, we'll get deeper into that issue. There had been in this list previously, and you'll note down in the editor's notes.
I'm sorry, Attorney Vos, Commissioner Strickland has a question.
Please.
Sorry, forgive me for the ignorance in the question, but are some of these still even relevant? For example, M, do we even have that facility?
You missed, yeah, that was my good example there. You missed, you can tell when this was written, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, motor vehicle inspection facilities for auto emissions. No, I don't believe such things exist in that form. There was discussion back in the 2015-16 Charter Review Commission of removing that one as being outside the, utterly irrelevant, what have you. Ultimately, I think they just decided to leave it. I don't think it kind of rose to the point where anybody wanted to fool with it one way or the other. Thank you. I was going to mention that one because I thought that was a good historical landmark, if nothing else. If you'll note down in the editor's notes, there was a provision that was actually physically removed by the 2016 charter amendment process, but it had actually been found illegal and unconstitutional in a lawsuit back in 2006 and 7, and that related to a provision that had been added concerning the regulation of municipal voluntary annexation. This is in the weeds, so I'm not going to go too far into it. There's a provision in the annexation statutes that says a county charter can provide for the exclusive means of voluntary municipal annexation. There was a charter amendment that was proposed and put into the Pinellas County Charter that said voluntary municipal annexation shall only be as specified in an ordinance passed by the Board of County Commissioners. Court said that's not good enough. If you want to specify a means of regulating voluntary municipal annexations, you have to think it all through and you have to write it all out in the charter, and the only way you can mess with it is by amending the charter. So that was taken out at that time. Moving on, we have another provision that echoes what I referenced up there in those powers. Additional services may be furnished within the municipalities when the county is requested to do so by a majority vote of the governing body of the municipality, and so authorized by a majority vote of the Board of County Commissioners. This may seem like a common provision nowadays, and you'll find that as a practical matter, this happens all over the state, even in non-charter counties or even in charter counties that don't have language like this. There were many battles back in earlier days about what we call transfer of powers, where folks may cease having a police department and utilize the sheriff for law enforcement services, or cease having a fire department, utilize the county fire. And this provision, I've always read to be there to facilitate that in light of what had been many battles back at that time. Moving on to 2.06, limitation of powers. This is an interesting one. So we talked about how municipalities were looking to protect themselves. Other folks were looking out for the interests of their offices as well. This provision prohibits the county charter from having the power under any circumstances from abolishing any municipality. I will tell you, except Miami-Dade County, county charters and charter counties cannot abolish municipalities. Only the Florida legislature can. However, down in Miami-Dade County, they can abolish municipalities. It's built into their charter, and it's built into their charter because it was built into the 1885 Florida Constitution. Again, I believe this was put in there back then because they figured some court might just analogize the Miami-Dade Charter and say everybody can do it. So this protection is there. In addition, it specifies that the county charter cannot in any manner change the status, duties, or responsibilities of the county officers specified in Section 1D, Article 8 of the state constitution. Why is this here? So prior to 2018, the Florida Constitution used to say in Article 8, Section 1D, that a charter county, by charter amendment, or basically that a county charter can abolish any one or more of the 5 constitutional officers and transfer all the powers and duties of that office to another office, usually to an office or department created under the charter to satisfy those duties. This had been done in a number of counties throughout the state. Volusia County, for example, had abolished all 5 of its constitutional officers and transferred it all to different departments under the control of the county council. In 2018, Amendment 10 was placed on the ballot by the State Constitutional Revision Commission that, among about 5 other things in that constitutional amendment, amended Article 8, Section 1D to state that county charters can no longer do this. County charters can no longer in any way abolish those offices or affect their duties or powers or responsibilities. So this is left over from that time when the constitutional officers want to have some protection from that possibility in the Florida Constitution. Moving on down to environmental lands, 2.07. A lot going on here, but the very basics of it are there's an enumerated list of environmental lands that the county has purchased. And basically, there is no selling it or transferring any interest in it or a lease longer than 10 years without a majority vote of the electors of Pinellas County, with some very limited exceptions for small pieces of property. So in the end, it's basically once enumerated sets of county-owned environmental lands get into the list, they're not getting back out without a referendum. Moving on down to 3.01, the Board of County Commissioners. This establishes, yes, sir.
Commissioner Eggers, yes, sir.
Yeah, just on that last point. So if additional ones are being purchased or it might be purchased during the next few months, and we want to add that in here, this would be the time to do that. Or what's the benefit of putting it in here? We know we're never going to sell it, but.
That's a good question. I would need to think a little bit more on that and take a look, particularly because it references a provision in the Pinellas County Code, and I want to make sure to see whether it's been interpreted that anything that's ever been added to that list subsequently can't come out without a referendum. These ones basically, I think, were the starter list.
Okay. Well, I'm not quite sure how these will be. If we'll be the owner or not, and see how it progresses, but I didn't know if these needed to be added or, so So
It's a fair question. I'd be glad to look into it further.
Okay, so maybe Attorney Vos, we can add that to the list of potential topics would be the environmental lands preservation and whether we need to add any, or if it's already done based on ordinance and the designation under the countywide plan as a preservation land or an environmental land.
Sounds fantastic. Will do. Moving on down to section 3.01. This is what establishes our Board of County Commissioners that has 4 county commission districts with the commissioners being elected solely by the electors within their county commission district, and 3 county commission districts at large where the entire electors in the entire county vote for those commissioners, with those commissioners residing within those 3 districts. .02 just establishes that ordinances and resolutions have to be passed by an affirmative vote of a majority of the members of the board voting, consistent with general law. 3.03 is an interesting one.
Mr. Chair.
It has to do with...
Yes, Commissioner Eggers.
Sorry about that.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick one on this. I'm assuming that any redistricting commission, any future, would handle how these are set. I mean, right now they're set in a certain way, and the at-large are set in a certain way. That would be determined not by charter, but through the redistricting commission? Is that?
That's... Let me address it when we get to redistricting in mere moments, because it's coming up really quickly. Because I want to explain the dynamics, and we have at least one member who was on that redistricting commission who would remember. Let me address 3.03 first, if I could. So this is a very important provision that you will find in a number of municipal and county charters. And it's one of the linchpins of the separation of legislative and executive or administrative branches of government. And that is the requirement for non-interference. As it states there, it's the intent of the county to separate the legislative and administrative branches of government. In a moment, we're going to be talking about the county administrator, except for the purposes of inquiry and information, or as otherwise permitted by law. The Board of County Commissioners and its members shall deal with county employees who are subject to the direction and supervision of the administrator solely through the administrator. And neither the board nor its members shall give any commands, directives, or instructions to, or make any other demands or requests of any such employee, either publicly or privately. Now, this may seem very constraining, because I've had to have the talk with county commissioners and city council members with this exact provision in their charter. All right, it seems very constraining that it seems like you can't have any sort of talks with county staff to figure out what's really going on so they can formulate policy and so on. So this first part of a non-interference provision is almost always paired with the second part that you see here. And that is, nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit individual members of the board from interaction, communication, and observation of all aspects of county government operations so as to obtain independent information to assist the board in the formulation of policies to be considered by the board. It's the express intent of this section, however, that any such action shall not interfere with the administrative operations of the county, and that recommendations for change or improvement in county administrative operations be made to and through the administrator. The idea is to establish the Board of County Commissioners as the policy-making body, all right? And the day-to-day administrative operations of the government of the county is within the hands of the county administrator. Now, that county administrator ultimately answers to the Board of County Commissioners, as we'll find.
So practically,
please.
On that one, this is a ticklish one, and so
always is.
When we hire administrators, that's an important question to get clarification on. But it does give the administrator the right to say commissioners can talk to such and such a level at any time you want without giving direction and all that kind of. So he can lay out, or he or she can lay out the parameters that administrator is comfortable with. That's what that second paragraph allows, really.
Generally, that's correct, yes. And what I will tell you, what I'll share with you, Commissioner, and with all the members is what I find in every jurisdiction that I've ever represented that have this or almost exactly this provision is that dynamic is slightly different depending on who the city manager or county administrator is and who the county commissioners or city council members are. So it's a very good point. That's kind of one of those dynamics when you have a new county administrator come in, you work out where precisely are those lines, because it works out in practice a little different.
Try to work them out ahead of time if we can.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank you.
Moving on now, Commissioner, to your question. Section 3.04 is new since the 2016 Charter Review Commission, and it all has to do with redistricting. So ultimately, the power to redistrict the county into its 4 single-member districts and 3 at-large districts ultimately still sits with the Board of County Commissioners. And it remained that way when I advised the Charter Review Commission back in 2016, because the advice I gave them then, and I still believe it to be the case, is that the Florida Constitution gives a direct grant of constitutional authority to the Board of County Commissioners to do that final redistricting drawing. However, it doesn't say anything about what has to lead up to that process. And so what this whole provision does is set up a county redistricting board, which ultimately is an advisory board. When the Board of County Commissioners gets the recommendations that come from the county redistricting board, the Board of County Commissioners does not have to follow them. However, what was built into the entire structure of this, and I think it worked out to a fair degree, as it worked through this first time it went through, was that all the heavy lifting and work in working through various permutations and possibilities and little tweaks and so on is done at the redistricting board level, such that a finished product kind of walks in the door with the Board of County Commissioners. So that's generally what you find as you go through this entire process. Any questions about that?
Attorney Vos, Vice Chair Grove.
I just had a question about Section C. It talks about the Board of County Commissioners may accept funds, grants, gifts, and services for the County Redistricting Board from the state, the government of the United States, or other sources, public or private. And I just kind of had a question about that because it seems a little dicey, in my opinion. And I didn't know if this is maybe referring to grants to kind of help, with doing research or that kind of thing, but I just wanted some clarity on that.
2 things. One, if there was a grant that would help defray some of those costs, that makes it crystal clear they can take it. I can tell you exactly where that language comes from. That language comes from a copy and paste from the Charter Review Commission provisions of the Pinellas County Charter, and that language in turn comes directly from Chapter 125 in what they call the Charter Commission language. It says it word for word, exactly that. Why they put it in there, don't know, but it's in, I'd probably guess, about 15 of the 20 county charters in the state. It's there everywhere else. People like me, the 3 or 4 or 5 attorneys in the whole state who look at these things, would think it's a little weird that it's not there, even though it's probably redundant. That's all it is.
Attorney Vos, another question on this, and I think in line somewhat parallel to Commissioner Eggers' question. So this lays out, and I know the Constitution lays out, that the redistricting ultimately lies with the county commission, and that processes every 10 years following the U.S. Census. Does the county electorate, through direct ballot access through this body, have the ability midstream to change the composition of the districts, i.e. making all 7 single member, making all 7 countywide? Is there any ability to do that? And if not, it would be important for us to know that now so that we don't waste any time thinking about it, or if people want to suggest that they know that we're not allowed to do that.
An outstanding question. No, there is no constraint at all on the ability to amend the county charter midstream, if you will, that it contemplates a decennial redistricting. There is nothing that in the Florida Constitution or otherwise that would restrict an amendment to the charter that would change the composition of how the Board of County Commissioners is composed, in the sense that it's 4 single-member districts and 3 at-large. If it were to change all to 1 or change that ratio, add county commissioners, remove county commissioners. That's being discussed actually over in Orange County right now. All of those things are very much on the table legally as things that can be done. Once that occurs, it would then be incumbent upon the Board of County Commissioners to adopt new commission lines and proceed that way.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, there is one additional thing worthy of note in the redistricting provisions here. One thing the 2015 and 16 Charter Review Commission was very interested in is what was a popular ballot proposal or well-known ballot proposal at that time that had made it into the Florida Constitution, they call the Fair Districts Amendments. And that instituted, with respect to Florida legislative redistricting for State House and State Senate and for House of Representatives, certain additional requirements. The interaction of those additional requirements are actually being litigated right now again, but they decided to incorporate, in guiding the county redistricting board's advisory work, to incorporate a good deal of that language from the Fair Districts Amendments. And basically it was the provisions down in D, in a portion of D. In developing the county redistricting board's proposals, no district shall be drawn with the intent to favor or disfavor a political party or an incumbent. Districts shall not be drawn with the intent or result of denying or abridging the equal opportunity of racial or language minorities to participate in the political process or diminish their ability to elect representatives of their choice, and districts shall be contiguous and as nearly equal in population as practicable. Further, in developing the proposals, county redistricting board shall consider, where feasible, utilizing municipal boundaries and keeping together unincorporated areas of the county. I will note some of those things are basically already built into the federal law that guides and the Florida constitutional law that guides redistricting efforts. And I will note that I believe it was just this last legislative session, at least some of the requirements were relating to favoring or disfavoring a political party or incumbent were actually incorporated into Florida election law, such that when county commissions and cities redistrict in the future, they will have to adhere to those requirements. So that what had been back then very novel, is actually gone statewide now, at least in part. Moving on to Article 4, the county administrator. We discussed, we have this separation in the charter between the Board of County Commissioners, which is the legislative and policy body, and the county administrator, which is the administrative head of government, but ultimately answers to the Board of County Commissioners, and is selected and ultimately removed by the Board of County Commissioners. Within the Pinellas County Charter, there's a fair bit of protection for the county administrator compared to some that I've seen. It requires an appointment by an affirmative vote of at least 5 members of the Board of County Commissioners. And for removal, it requires affirmative vote for removal of at least 4 members at 2 consecutive meetings, or 2 consecutive regularly scheduled meetings, or by a vote of 5 at any one meeting of the board. So a higher standard than mere majority, both to hire or to fire.
Okay, Attorney Bose, Commissioner Strickland, you have a question? Could you turn your microphone on? Sorry, it's all.
My apologies. I don't know if we can edit where it says he several times throughout 4.01, because if you look at 4.02, it just talks about the county attorney multiple times. So why wouldn't we just say the county administrator multiple times?
Good point. We want to add that to the housekeeping items maybe to think about, Mr. Thomas and Attorney Vos?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. Got it.
Okay. And maybe that should go throughout the charter. I don't know if there's any other sections like that, but.
I think just for
And
clarification.
that does tend to be the way I implement changes like that, is it makes documents slightly bit longer, but instead of using pronouns, just say the name of the office.
Yes, Commissioner Eggers. Oh, microphone, sorry.
You think I've done this a couple times. This paragraph, and when you look at the county attorney paragraph, I think is missing. So there's not really a discussion. I think we talked about different ideas at the last meeting, but this is pretty specific and it doesn't get that way for the county attorney. So anyway, just so when we get to that, just point out where that
When we get
would be
down to county
discussed.
attorney, I'll give you my
Okay.
analysis of what I think it means.
Okay.
And it's certainly able to be amended to be more specific and precisely, what standards it would be held to. So moving on, you see that the county administrator shall be a full-time position, serve at the pleasure of the Board of County Commissioners, of course, subject to the standards that we just discussed. Appointed solely on the basis of executive administrative qualifications, have a number of duties. And it's to administer and carry out the directives and policies issued by the Board of County Commissioners, except that he shall not be director or given authority to make appointments of members to any county boards, commissions, or agencies. So some regulations of how much power he or she can be delegated in any instance. Subject to provisions of county merit and civil service plans, select and employ personnel to fill all vacancies. This is a very common provision that all of the employees, or oftentimes all of the employees except perhaps those who work for the county attorney, are employees of the county administrator, ultimately hired and fired by the county administrator. As you can see, employment of persons in unclassified positions shall be subject to confirmation by the Board of County Commissioners. So we have some instances, this actually mirrors the Florida County Administration Act. There's an option for even non-charter counties to implement a county administrator form of government. What you find in that statute is when you have department heads or department heads or department managers or what have you, the selection and hiring of those individuals has to go before the Board of County Commissioners for confirmation. Have requirement to supervise all of those department heads and employees and to terminate for cause. Termination of unclassified positions also subject to confirmation by the Board of County Commissioners. To supervise all aspects of carrying into effect policies implemented or established by the Board of County Commissioners, and act as the county budget officer and perform other duties required by the Board of County Commissioners. So basically, performing all the administrative day-to-day functions of county government or supervising all of those who are doing that. Moving on down to 4.02, county attorney. This is an interesting one for a number of reasons. This is one that was substantially amended back in 2015, 2016. So Pinellas County's charter is a little unique, was unique even before the 2016 amendments. Pinellas County Charter specified then and still specifies now that the county attorney and the county attorney's office represents not just the county, the Board of County Commissioners and county administrator and county departments. It also specifies that the county attorney represents the 5 constitutional officers. This is, I will share with you nowadays, not the norm throughout the state. It is certainly not, the norm in charter counties. And even in non-charter counties, even in very small non-charter counties, it used to be the norm, I'd say about 40 years ago. But even in non-charter counties, as I think I mentioned, I'm the county attorney for Okeechobee County. And there, the county attorney does not represent any of the constitutional officers. They each have their own attorney. So in this instance here, the charter provided and required that the county attorney represented all 5 constitutional officers. So in the course of the 2016 Charter Review Commission process, it was proposed, hey, the county attorney is then hired and fired by the Board of County Commissioners, but became their attorney too. And so the constitutional officers, or the constitutional officer that was the member of the Charter Review Commission at that time, proposed we ought to amend this to make it be that the county attorney is chosen by the Board of County Commissioners and the constitutional officers. That's what ended up happening here. It was put together, and it went on the ballot, and it was approved. So what we have here is a unique little entity in Florida, a county attorney oversight committee that consists of each of the county commissioners and 5 constitutional officers, and it's ultimately that committee that the county attorney is hired and potentially terminated by. As Commissioner, you mentioned, all it says concerning termination or hiring is who shall serve at the pleasure of the county attorney oversight committee. That, a provision like that means that it would be simple action of that body with no further protections, no further procedure. It's a very common provision you find all over the state, and it's what it said, except it said the Board of County Commissioners before it was amended in 2016. It's certainly amenable to amendment to specify, for example, the same protections that you might find up for county administrator.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. They're both obviously critical positions in the county, and I would think that although it was interesting with the change in the 2016 vote, they're now have, instead of having an odd number 7 people, we have an even number 12 people. So I'm not quite sure how that works in terms of hiring and firing. There's nothing there. If it comes to 6-6, then
tie votes fail.
I guess we make our rules as we go in terms of that number, or because it's not shown here. I mean, you must have 9 of the 12. You must have 3/4 to hire, or that's just something that body would have to decide, that group of people, each time that comes up, or there's nothing in the charter that designates that.
That's correct. In the absence of any guidance on it, it would be simple majority vote unless you had rules that modified that. In full disclosure to the members of the CRC, it was not anticipated that this body was going to be meeting anytime soon when it was first instituted, because there was actually a provision put in there that exempted the then current county attorney from the provisions of it. Okay, because basically we're really kind of changing the terms of employment a little bit, who you answer to. In any event, it came to be that the then county attorney happened to be ready for retirement and then retired a little while after it came into effect. So then this county attorney oversight committee had to convene and figure out how to hire a new county attorney. I was actually asked at that time, because this was partially my fault because I wrote it, to come over and represent and help that body at that time through that process initially. And unfortunately, I cannot remember precisely if you all set any higher standard than that. I don't think you all did.
I don't think so.
Ultimately, it is something that certainly could be established in the charter as being a higher standard than simple majority.
Okay. Something to talk about later. Thank you.
Mr. Rose?
Yes, Commissioner Everett.
So you just mentioned terms of employment with them. Well, I wouldn't expect you to know their contracts right off the top of your head. I'm assuming they both have employment agreements, the county attorney and county admin.
That is common, but I don't know that for a certain fact.
Kind of looking at Commissioner Eggers. So are these the sort of things that would be outlined as protections in that agreement? I guess you couldn't answer that today, right? We're assuming that they have contracts. Altering this, I guess, is what I'm asking. Would that impact anything that's written in there?
If there were a protection that was stronger in the contract than what was set out in the charter, then I would suggest the contract would control with regard to that. And as I vaguely recall, it was many years ago now. I think I actually, if Ms. White has a contract, I'm pretty sure I reviewed it. for the body, but again, it was many years ago.
I'm assuming, I'm almost positive that the county admin does at least, because that was a big negotiation, as I recall, but, okay, thank you.
And again, 4.03, we have another reiteration. They put
Mr. Vose, sorry. Commissioner Strickland?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry to go back. Am
Please.
I understanding this correctly under 4.01, number 3, when it talks about the county administrator makes the recommendation for termination, but it goes to the county commission for confirmation?
That is only for termination of persons in unclassified positions shall be subject to confirmation by the Board of County Commissioners. And I can't recall, I'm not overly familiar with Pinellas County's civil service regulations, but I think that may mean very high ups. I don't recall precisely how high up. It may be just department heads.
I don't remember ever voting or terminating employees at any level.
And
It rests with the county administrator, so.
Worthwhile, pique my own curiosity, so I'm going to take a peek to know what that is.
Get some clarification from the county. Thank you.
I think they're referring to exempts. I don't really hear them called unclassifieds, but I think that's probably what they're referring to.
What was that?
I think when they say unclassifieds, they're referring to exempt employees. Right.
That's what I figured it might be, but I didn't want to overly speculate. Right. So I didn't know the terminology they use in their civil service language. Any other questions on Article 4? All right. Oh, actually, I started to say in Section 4.03, we have a second time stated the document cannot change the status, duties, or responsibility of the 5 constitutional officers. So double protection there, I suppose. Moving on to Article 5, 5.01, effect on local county laws. All existing laws, ordinances, resolutions, regulations, and policies of the county shall remain operative except where inconsistent or in direct conflict with this charter until amended or repealed by the Board of County Commissioners. This is just a continuity provision, just to make clear for very picky lawyers. Hey, you just started a new government. Does any of that old stuff apply? Yes, it does. It all carries over from when the county charter, before the county charter was adopted. This is an interesting provision. As I mentioned, there seems to be a particularly thick spider web of special laws that continue to govern Pinellas County and different governmental entities within Pinellas County to this day. One of the effects of the adoption of the charter was, as A mentions here, special laws of the state relating to or affecting Pinellas County and general laws of local application, which apply only to Pinellas County, except those relating exclusively to a municipality, school board, or one of the boards, authorities, districts, or councils listed in subsection B, which are kind of shielded from these, what we're about to do here, or except those laws dealing with saltwater fishing, wetlands, aquatic preserves, bird sanctuaries. So again, a number of special laws that all seem to apply just down here, shall become county ordinances of Pinellas County and shall remain in full force and effect to the extent they're not in conflict with this charter, subject to amendment and repeal by the Board of County Commissioners. This is a progression that happens in charter counties, and it models what happened with the adoption of the Municipal Home Rule Powers Act for municipalities. Basically, when we transition to home rule and when you get home rule authority, the special acts that pertained only to your government and not anything else kind of subsidiary like particular entities and so on get translated from being special laws into ordinances, and the Board of County Commissioners can change those by ordinance. They don't have to go back up to the legislature to change those. Again, teasing out whether or not it is actually a special law that's subject to that or not is quite a deep analytical process. We've got a list here of different boards, authorities, districts, and councils that are protected from the charter doing anything to them. Long list: Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority, Emergency Medical Services Authority, number of different fire control districts, Pinellas County Planning Council, Personnel Board, Pinellas Police Standards Council, all of these created by, as I understand it, by special acts and cannot be dealt with this charter. Yes, sir.
So is that a complete list, or is there just some missing? For instance, East Lake Special Fire Control District is not listed. Is there a reason that that's not listed?
Does anyone happen to know, did it exist in 1980?
Probably not.
I'm hearing from staff that it did not. Now, I will tell you, I will offer this to you all. And again, this is definitely one of those instances where I'm just a guy with a law degree just saying stuff. All right? I'm not speaking on behalf of the county or the county attorney's office or anything. I would suggest to you that any sort of fire district created pursuant to the state fire district laws or by special act or what have you is not within the ambit of something that the county charter can modify in any event, okay? Again, keep in mind, this list was put in back in a time when the powers of charter counties were much more fluid. The case law over the last many decades has made crystal clear that we couldn't fool with any of those fire districts anyways.
So does it make sense to,
legislature allowed us to.
So does it make sense to put that on the list of things to clean up such that you would add it to this list?
I wouldn't suggest against putting it on the list to discuss that. I would just offer a general thought, though. Keep in mind that when you're putting things like this in front of the voters who don't sit around all day to understand the deep nuances of how the Florida Constitution, all these different special laws and all this work, they might end up with an impression, despite our best efforts at drafting to the contrary, that somehow now with taking that list out, the county's going to be able to do something and control Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority.
I think what Commissioner Pasovich was saying was adding other subsequent created special act districts like the fire districts to the list of protected entities. Is that right?
It is, but I think your point was that may create some confusion by the mere fact of putting it on the ballot. Is that what you're?
I would. This is speculation, but it's speculation based on experience. It would probably create less confusion to add than to remove. Adding some, just clarifying, hey, these are ones that can't do anything with either, versus removing a whole list and then folks somehow getting the impression that, oh, now they're fair game. Again, I'm not suggesting don't discuss it further. I'm just giving you my initial thoughts on what.
I think we should add it to the list to confirm whether those other subsequently enacted districts are already protected. My belief is that they are. And then if we find that to be the affirmative answer, then we can discuss whether it's worth adding them or not. Does that make sense? I don't think you can get rid of a special district without the consent of the legislature, which would have to order a referendum. I know that from the JWB. There was a time when the legislature passed a law that all of the Children's Services Councils had to go to a referendum for reapproval. But that had to be done by the legislature. It could not have been done by the county or somebody else. So my belief is that those bodies are already protected by virtue of being special act created bodies. But if Mr. Vose, if you could just add that to your list to confirm, then we can keep track of that and figure out if we need to add them or not.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Butler.
Thank you very much. Just kind of a follow-up to that. Those are all special act created districts, are they not?
That's my understanding, unless anyone has any particular knowledge to the contrary. But that is, I have not gone back and looked at each special act all the way back to whenever they were passed. But I have been advised from multiple well-knowledgeable sources that that's the case.
Thank you. Thanks,
Commissioner Jennings.
Yeah, thank you. Is that something we can confirm?
What's that?
Is that something we can confirm?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, moving on.
Moving on down, we are in the home stretch. Article 6, charter amendments. So there are a number of different ways a charter amendment can be proposed to the charter. You all are engaged in one of them right now, but we'll start first with the Board of County Commissioners. So the Board of County Commissioners can, by ordinance, pass by affirmative vote of the majority plus one members propose amendments to the charter. And it gives the power to actually call special referendum elections for that purpose if you want to. By the way, Commissioner, you had brought up the question before, and I believe we have in our list of things to discuss a little further later on in the meeting, but I did go back and just redouble my thinking and recollection on it. The legislature has made many modifications to certain actions that can only be put on a ballot for a general election. Those have all been really directed towards different tax referenda. It is, there has been no regulation by the legislature saying charter amendments can only go on a general election ballot or anything like this. Not yet, at least. And it requires certain notice and advertising requirements for that to go on the ballot, and specifies that it'll pass when approved by a majority of the electors voting on such amendment. By the way, I will preemptively just mention this because it's a topic that comes up often. Folks have asked, can we make it a higher standard? Can we make it like the Florida Constitution where it has to pass by, what are we at, 60%? They were bouncing around with 66. I think we're still at 60. Folks have many times asked, can we make it 60% to pass a charter amendment? And there's even at least one county charter that says 60% in it. But the case law in Florida is crystal clear that the Florida Constitution says it must be by majority vote, and you cannot set a higher standard. Clay County actually tried to do that a number of years ago. It was challenged in court, and the first DCA said, no, that's in direct contradiction to the provisions of the Florida Constitution. Moving on to 6.02. This is the opportunity provided to the electors of the county to place charter amendments on the ballot. In the 2016 election, or in the 2016 Charter Review Commission process, there were actually modifications to this. It had previously been, if I recall, I think I have it here. It had previously been that 10% of registered voters within the county had to sign a petition to get it on the ballot. That was lowered to 8%, and the time in which to collect those petitions was changed from 180 days to 240 days. So that was one of your 2016 changes, but basically it provides an opportunity for members of the public to propose charter amendments and get them on the ballot so they can get a requisite number of signatures in a requisite number of time. Moving on down to the Charter Review Commission. You all are generally familiar with this procedure. 13 members. As I mentioned before, Pinellas County's Charter Review Commission is unique. It's the only one in the state that requires, as opposed to prohibits, certain elected officials to be on the Charter Review Commission, and specifies the process that you all are working through right now. Moving on down to 6.04.
Sorry to interrupt. Just
please
clarify and make sure we're all aware. So my understanding is that unlike some cities, or for example, the redistricting commission, which was advisory, that this commission actually has direct ballot access, which means that we will make a report to the county commission, but that whatever we propose to be placed on the ballot will be placed on the ballot, and that will be done on a case-by-case basis by a majority vote of this body. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. So not every Charter Review Commission, and by the way, not all 20 charter counties have Charter Review Commissions. Some don't. And not all of the Charter Review Commissions in the state have direct ballot access, all right? The Pinellas County Charter Review Commission is one of the ones with the power to place charter amendments on the ballot. There is a provision in here that effectively says that the Board of County Commissioners has to engage in the ministerial act of putting precisely what you all pass out of here on the ballot. However, that is not a discretionary act by the Board of County Commissioners. They must put it directly on the ballot. So this Charter Review Commission is not advisory to the Board of County Commissioners. Board of County Commissioners cannot change what comes out of this body before it goes on the ballot. Chairman, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Moving on down to 6.04. We have, this is, again, another interesting one. These are number of different protections that were put in. Again, protecting the county constitutional officers, as well as the, give me 1 second here, sorry, a lot going on in this one.
Yes, Commissioner Posevich.
Yeah, while you're looking, sorry to interrupt. Back on subsection D, it says the Charter Review Commission shall review on behalf of the citizens the operation of the county government. Is there any more that you can, any more color you can give to that? Because that seems like it could be a pretty high standard, right? When you review the operation of county government, right? I mean, it could be quite a task.
Sure. So I will tell you, in Pinellas County and then in charter counties throughout the state, you see similar language. In Orange County, it reads, they shall review all phases of county government. What does that mean? We've all always wondered. What I would suggest the Charter Review Commission would be reviewing is those matters that are structural to the county government, the fundamental way that the county government will be set up, okay? Not whether they clock in at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, in the Environmental Services Department or anything like this. Those would be matters that I would suggest typically not, and I stray away from getting too much in the weeds and telling somebody what's a charter issue and what's not a charter issue and so on. But keep in mind this fundamental principle. Anything you put into the charter, the only way you can change it is by another ballot referendum. So if you want to lock something in place for all time, you put it in the charter even as times change, and maybe sometimes that's good, and maybe sometimes that's not where you want to go. So I would suggest to you, I don't know that they're talking about, do they open the doors at 7:30 or do they open them at 8 or any sort of day-to-day operational metrics.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Eggers.
Just as an example, I was just trying to think of your question, what that might include. And I don't know this, maybe Miami-Dade does this because they seem to do everything a little differently. But like a strong county mayor form of government, is there such a thing? And
there is.
And that would be
in Orange.
Okay, in Orange County? Okay, so that would be something that would fall under that little sentence.
Yeah.
I mean, that would
Thank
be
you.
a major one to tackle, but I'm just saying that would be.
And that's why I would direct you. You could categorize it as operations, but it's really looking at the structural operations of government. Who's in charge? Who has what powers? Who has what powers as against other officials within the government? Subject to what restrictions? Things like this. And to your point, Orange County is the only charter county in the state with an elected county mayor who's independently elected and serves both as the head of the executive branch and as the chair of the Board of County Commissioners.
And Attorney Bose, is Duval, is that the mayor's, like the executive of the county, but then the commission is the legislative body? So are there county mayors that have essentially the county administrator role, but they're elected as the county administrator?
That's exactly right. And Duval's the other one. I probably mentioned this before, but there are always going to be 2 of the 20 that are just going to be more different than everybody else. The other is Duval. And the reason why is Duval and City of Jacksonville are what they call a consolidated government. Duval County is the City of Jacksonville, and vice versa. There's a particular provision in the Florida Constitution that expressly allows that. And in the Duval County, City of Jacksonville structure, they have a city council of 19 members and an elected mayor who is, as I recall, not a member of the governing body. He is the elected executive. Similarly, in Miami-Dade, you have the Miami-Dade, I think they're called the county commission down there. And then you have the county mayor. And the county mayor is an elected executive. As I mentioned in Orange, it's the only instance in the state where you have the county mayor is the elected executive, effectively the elected county administrator, and also the chair of the Board of County Commissioners.
Commissioner Scott, are you looking to make a comment? I see your hand up. You are. Okay, you're muted. Yeah, there you go. You're unmuted now. Thank you.
Thank you, fellow commissioners, for the opportunity to participate via Zoom, and I apologize for not being there personally. I'm away for work, and regrettably, I need to excuse myself at this time. But thank you very much. I appreciate the process, and I will review what you will do further in this process via the methods that are made available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Scott. Have a great night. We'll see you at the next meeting.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Attorney Vos, you want to?
Thank you so much.
Close
Yeah,
to done.
let me bring it in for a landing here. So I'm going to break 6.04 into two parts. I'll give you a little history. So as I mentioned, the Pinellas County Charter is one of, I think there are only two. Volusia County is one. Is one of the few county charters in the state that was proposed by special act of the legislature rather than going through a number of other processes to initiate charter government. And there had been a belief in some quarters for a number of decades that, as in Pinellas County, as I understand it, or at least as the second DCA described it, that somehow the Pinellas County Charter is what you might call a limited home rule charter or kind of a second-class citizen home rule charter or what have you, and that amendments to the charter could only become legal if they're also approved by the Florida legislature, at least with regard to certain subject matter that the second DCA was addressing at that time. And actually, they spoke broadly and said the concept didn't exist. The second DCA ruled that no, the Pinellas County Charter is not a limited or second-class charter, and you can amend it the way any charter county can amend their charter.
Okay.
In addition, we have one other provision in here. It's one that you find in Pinellas. You also find it in Palm Beach County Charter, and that is if there's a charter amendment that's proposed that actually affects the powers of municipalities as well, it would only become effective within that municipality if a majority of the electors voting within that municipality also voted to approve it. And this is a very controversial provision in county charter law, but it has not really kind of come to a head and been put to the test for a court to say whether that really works or not. Finally, we've got a couple cleanup provisions here. We do have 6.05. This is historical. I actually couldn't remember why the 2016 Charter Review Commission didn't take it out. This was the 2004 Charter Review Commission put on the ballot to say, hey, we want 2 more years and to look at a couple additional things. They put it on as a charter amendment. It passed. So they had 2 more years. That's all done and over. And again, I can't recall why the 2016 one didn't clean that up in a cleanup amendment. Finally, back in 2016, there was a charter amendment proposed by the CRC to require that the financial impact of proposed county charter amendments would be summarized by the clerk of the circuit court and then placed on the ballot directly under the ballot question to provide voters an insight with an estimate of the increase or decrease in revenues or costs of the county resulting from the approval of the proposed charter amendment.
Mr. Vos, let me ask you on that. I'm assuming there's some provision in the Florida Constitution that allows for that, not, that's not considered part of the ballot question, the 75 words and the title and all that?
Yeah, no, it is, and that's the way it's drafted to state it's following the ballot summary and not part of the ballot summary. There is not, it's a very good question. There is not a provision in the Florida Constitution that provides for it. It is a provision you find in some county charters around the state, and it's one that they wanted to add in at that time.
And that issue hasn't been litigated about whether that actually violates the 75 words or single.
It has not been litigated.
Okay, not that I suggested it be, but, okay.
And finally, we have some lawyerly provisions at the end, basically saying anybody who is owed money with bonds by the county, their bonds are still valid. Any questions about a very basic overview of the Pinellas County?
Commissioner Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Attorney Vos, I remember we touched on it briefly, but maybe between me not remembering and for the folks listening at home, we talked about kind of the difference between things that we need to put on the ballot and edits and the things we've kind of been referring to, like the small cleanup things. Can you break that down again as far as, I mean, are we able to make those, mentioning, we're talking about pronouns and things like that. Is that something that has to go through the whole process? Can you remind me, or can we?
Unfortunately, in counties with county charters, it does. Okay. Now, I will tell you, last time around in 2015-16, we had a cleanup amendment that could probably take almost word for word and just had some additional cleanup along these lines.
And it just packages it all into, got it.
All together, because, and I try to use or recommend to my charter review commissions to use cleanup amendments very sparingly. It's about voter trust, If you slip substantive changes in a voter cleanup or in a cleanup amendment, people aren't going to trust anything you say. So it truly needs to be things that are non-substantive, that aren't going to change the legal effect of anything in the charter.
Perfect. Thank you.
Commissioner Eggers.
Yeah, just real quick, we talked about 6.05. That's the one that asked for the additional 2 years.
Yes.
It does say in the last section E that it was repealed, so it has no value to the charter. Would that be thrown in as a cleanup as well?
That's why I was saying I was racking my brain when I was preparing for this. Why didn't we clean that up in 15-16 and take it out? So yeah, that would be a typical type of thing you would take out. I don't know why we didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, are we ready to move on to just a very brief overview of the 6 ballot questions that were proposed last time? And I think all 6 of them passed, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. And actually, I will be exceedingly brief because I've discussed most of them already in my overview. We discussed, so yeah, there were 6 ballot questions that were put on the ballot by the 2016 Charter Review Commission. The first one that passed with the least votes, but it made it over 50%, was this lowering from 10% to 8% and increasing from 180 days to 240 days the time in which to gather petitions for petition initiatives. The second was the financial impact statement for proposed charter amendments, and we discussed that, and that passed and was placed in the charter. The third was the county redistricting board, which we discussed, which passed and was placed in the charter. Fourth was the relating to the selection, termination, annual review of the county attorney by the County Attorney Oversight Committee, which was put in the charter. Fifth was a tweak to the CRC provisions, actually. It was amended to specify that each of the 7 county commissioners had to nominate to the Charter Review Commission a member who resides in the commissioner's district. Prior to that, it was not specified that you had to reside in the commissioner's district to be nominated by them.
Let's have a question on that.
Yes.
So at the at-large districts, they have to live in a certain area, but they have the whole county that votes for them. So does this apply to them as well? That it just has to be somebody from the county or from the area in which they live? It's a little different than the district commissioners. That one's pretty clear.
Yeah.
But I was just curious how that interprets. It kind of came up in discussion when we were doing the appointments around this table. And so I just was curious how that was interpreted.
I have an inclination as to the answer I would give, but let me double check some things before I mistakenly blow up any preconceived notions. And finally, the cleanup amendment that I mentioned. That again, I'm really surprised we didn't throw in that provision there relating to that 2004 one, but it would be the type that you could.
Okay. All right. Any questions, Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, just does the financial piece that passed, the financial impact statement, does that have to be included in the verbiage, or is that just in the 75 words, or is that separate, kind of a separate document?
It is. Study. Yeah, no, it is separate. And let's go into the particular requirement. Give me 1 second here. As to each proposed charter amendment placed on the ballot for approval, Clerk of the Circuit Court as County Auditor shall prepare, and the Board of County Commissioners shall place on the ballot, immediately following the ballot summary, a separate financial impact statement not exceeding 75 words, estimating the increase or decrease in revenues or costs of the county resulting from the approval of the proposed charter amendment. So it's a separate 75-word statement under the ballot question.
Okay.
And
that's why I was asking whether that's even legal, but it's something that hasn't been challenged, so we'll go with it for now.
And in case anyone is curious, I looked up on the supervisor's site how these all fared. As I mentioned, they all passed. Amendment 1, which was the amendment to the initiative petition requirements, just barely passed. Amendment 2, which was, my brain fails me now. Financial impact statements, yes, passed with almost 80% of the vote. The third, which was the redistricting board, passed with 61%. The fourth, which was the county attorney provision, passed with 77%. Fifth, tweaking the Charter Review Commission requirements, passed with 76%, and finally, the cleanup amendment passed with over 86%. Any questions?
Any other questions? Okay.
All right.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Steck.
As I recall, and this is foggy, but that business about the 2004 commission just was left there just as kind of a historical thing. Didn't sound like there was any reason to remove it, but that's just my guess.
That would have been my best guess, too. Commissioner Steck was on the Charter Review Commission last time around 8 years ago, so I'll be relying on your memory as well, because in my advanced years, it all goes away. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Vos. Mr. Vos, don't go too far. I guess you can address it from your seat, but the main reason for number 7, I wanted to get some feedback on structure of this. So we're just starting out this process, and I found that in the redistricting commission, it would have been very helpful if we would have had some very specific feedback from the county commissioners. Now, this body is very different in that the county commissioners don't have to approve the verbiage or the subjects that we ultimately put on the ballot. Having said that, I think it would be extremely collaborative of us at this early stage to proactively reach out to each of the county commissioners and each of the constitutional officers to solicit their feedback on things that they would like us to look at and to explore as we're kind of putting our list together to get their thoughts and their feedback on what that list should look like. I believe, and the big question I have about this is the structure of soliciting the feedback. Property Appraiser Twitty is representing the constitutional officers. Commissioner Eggers is representing the commissioners. Property Appraiser Twitty is free to speak to the other constitutional officers because they're all different executive branches as enumerated by the Florida Constitution, and they're not voting on anything together. They're not part of the sunshine law as it relates to the voting conflict subject matter. However, the county commissioners aren't really voting on the subject, but as Attorney Vose said, they are voting administratively, or at least somehow providing us with administrative guidance. So I don't know if Commissioner Eggers can specifically personally solicit feedback from the other commissioners, or if he'd even be comfortable doing that. But I'm trying to figure out what's the framework for how we reach out to the commissioners, what's the framework for how property appraiser Twitty reaches out to the constitutional officers and get them engaged early.
Glad to offer some thoughts. I think with regard to the constitutional officers, you have a lot freer hand. No concerns there with regard to, if you wanted to bring back feedback from the other constitutional officers. I'd probably be a little bit more hesitant with regard to the county commissioners, except if y'all wanted to talk about it at a county commission meeting, that's perfectly fine. If y'all talked about it at a county commission meeting to say, hey, I've been asked to inquire, does anybody have any particular things they'd like the CRC to take a look at? Y'all can have a discussion there at the Board of County Commissioners meeting with no problem under the Sunshine Law. Otherwise, however you'd like to do, if individual county commissioners want to come speak to the CRC as well, that is a common but not universal practice throughout the state as well. So,
or we could
make everybody-
designate Mr. Thomas to be our liaison to the other county commissioners. And just for the public, it's not about not complying with sunshine law. Anything that the county commissioners put into writing to Mr. Thomas, or that Mr. Thomas puts into writing to the county commissioners, is going to be public record. But the concern is that if we are members of the same governing body, we're not allowed to talk about things that we may be voting on outside of a publicly noticed meeting, which is why I didn't know if Commissioner Eggers would be the appropriate person to do that.
I think it's better. Yeah, I think it would be better if you do it. You contact and if they maybe if they want to have a discussion at a commission meeting or workshop, then they can do that. But I think there still should be an avenue for each of them to be able to, I don't know, reach out to you with ideas in writing so that you can bring them to us. Or I think ultimately, I think that's the best way to do it. Or they can come here, I guess, and speak. Right. But
Mr. Chair, that was going to be my suggestion. I'm more than glad to reach out to each one of them individually, set up appointments to have that conversation. But I also want to defer if there was a desire, if the board as a whole wanted to do that in a public meeting, I could also be at that public meeting and help facilitate that conversation. So I'm open to either direction that you would like to go.
Well, I can certainly bring that up for discussion at our next meeting and just say, look, I'd like to have the discussion, maybe not at that particular meeting, but at a subsequent meeting, about how you want to access the charter review. Do you want to have discussions as a group, or do you individually want to send ideas to you that would then be brought to us? So we can have that kind of conversation to get their input. But I do think you're right on the collaborative nature. It's a great idea to do that, and to the constitutionals. I mean, they're working through that charter all the time.
Sure, absolutely.
Not even realizing it, but they work it, so.
Yeah. Commissioner Steck.
Just to clarify, we as individual commission members, based on the Government and Sunshine Law, are not allowed to talk to county commissioner or other folks or each other. Other than
Mr.
these
Vose
meetings,
will
correct?
address that, but no, that's not quite correct.
Yeah, no. It is perfectly permissible for any member of the CRC to speak with a county commissioner, for example, except our one county commissioner happens to be a member of the CRC. The restrictions of the Sunshine Law apply only when you are on the same body, okay? So it is perfectly permissible for any member of the CRC, subject to the exception I mentioned, to speak with county commissioner about anything having to do with CRC matters or anything else.
Except for Commissioner Eggers. Commissioner Overend, did you have a comment?
Yes. Mr. Vose, you went through this before, maybe briefly, the charter amendment section of the charter. So the county commission doesn't, I would appreciate having everybody's feedback to echo that sentiment, particularly since the constitutional officers don't have another mechanism to contribute to amending the charter. Whereas, could the commissioners amend the charter at any point? They have to go through the ordinance process, right? I'm just kind of skimming that section real.
The county commission has the power to propose amendments to the charter at any time.
But we can't change the charter. We can.
That's correct. All they can do is, just like the CRC, all they can do is propose amendments and put them on the ballot.
So to kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I should have, I might have misspoken then, that's what I meant. They can send it to referendum and through the ordinance process. Okay, thank you.
So to kind of put a button on the topic of solicitation of ideas, comments, concerns regarding the charter, I also would like to extend that to the county administrator and county staff. I found Clearwater's charter is like totally different than this charter, but I found that when I was going through the Clearwater Charter Review in 2015, some of the best ideas we got were from the CRA and the economic development staff. There are some things that we may not even know are kind of vehicles or mechanisms that might give them better ability to do affordable housing or things like that. So the county staff itself might actually have some ideas. So if you could reach out to them as well.
I can certainly do that with the administrator and and with Nancy as our liaison. I just wanted to clarify, Mike, are you going to go ahead and solicit your colleagues on that, and then you and I can coordinate about getting that material together? Okay, thank you.
And the other thing to remember too, all of us, well, not all of us, some of us were appointed by individual commissioners, and I would expect that we would be talking to those individuals particularly about things that they were interested in, and that's totally fine. Just remember, anything that's in writing will be public record, so, okay. All right, any other comments on that? Questions? No? Okay. All right, so this is kind of our running list part of the meeting. I don't specifically anticipate that we're gonna dig into the weeds on every single one of these topics tonight. I think that the purpose for this list is to kind of keep a list of things that we want Mr. Vos and Mr. Thomas to develop as future agenda items. Having said that, and we've added some tonight, I do want to confirm what those are before we leave to make sure we're not missing anything. Having said that, before we do that, does anyone have any more specific feedback, ideas that they want to either add, or things like, for example, on the term limits that you want to specifically articulate now, understanding that we're not going to make any decisions tonight. I don't think we really want to get into a big debate tonight on these specific topics without having more developed agenda items on those topics. Vice Chair Grove.
I would like to add something to the list. Under section 2.02, this is the rights of citizens, E. I wanted to add sexual orientation, gender identity, and appearance, because these are not under the protection of human rights in this section. I've looked at a couple of other charters. Hillsborough County actually includes protection for sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. So I just thought that might be something that we can add to the our growing list.
Sure. Add that to the discussion list, please. Any other specific items to add, or anybody want to dive in on any of these items we've already put on there and give us some initial thoughts? We don't need to do that. Again, we can do that when we have a more developed agenda item, but are there anything, Mr. Vos or Mr. Thomas, that you wanted to add in terms of the emerging issues category, or things that you may have discovered so far, or we still need some more time to develop those?
Well, there's two pieces. Based on the conversation that I heard when Attorney Vos was going through the list, I had heard a discussion to potentially dig into greater detail on 2.07, environmental lands, future acquisition and or disposition. I'd also seen under, I believe it was 5.02, list a review of the various boards, commissions, special act issues to see if that was current. And the other piece was the piece that Attorney Vos had raised about the Section 605 with the 2004 CRC process. Those were the other three items that I heard come up through this, but I wanted to make sure that that was the list, if there was anyone else that had other comments on those.
Yes, Commissioner Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could just add to the list and keep a running tab of some of the cleanup things that have been brought up. I am going to be the cleanup guy, because that stuff kind of drives me insane when it's like not accurate. So if we could just get that list going of some things that have been mentioned. And one thing specifically, and I'm not sure what path we were going down on the pardon me, the legislative, the groups that were created by an act of the legislature. But if that was a path we were going down as far as trying to define items as that, to keep it kind of vague instead of specifically listing those things, that would be something that I would want. So that I would be interested in discussing further, would be trying to define global, kind of generalize those special districts if they're created by an act of legislature, just to list it that way instead of worrying about reading through a charter that if people don't understand it completely, or listing things that don't exist or other things that should be there.
Yeah, it would be much easier just to say special districts created by act of the legislature as opposed to try to enumerate things that were in 1980. I mean, for example, Pinellas Planning Council is now for Pinellas. You know, some of us know that, but the average voter probably has no idea that. So, yeah, a holistic look at that is a good one. And then the pronouns, specifically from the county administrator section, I remember that was on the list. And then Dr. Grove just added the issue for, what was it, 2.02E for the human rights protections. And then in the environmental lands issue specifically, I think the question was, do we need to, again, that's a list, do we need to add to that list, or are these things already added? And I think that based on being designated preservation or environmental on the countywide plan, that they're protected, but we want to just make sure. So that's something we want to look at as well.
That's certainly how I interpreted it. That's something I assume we could work with some language about future acts. So any future land so designated or something. Obviously, that's in Wade's territory, but that's what I heard you were looking to accomplish there.
Okay, Commissioner Jennings, and then Commissioner Strickland.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a few things I'd like to add to the list, particularly Article 6, Charter Amendments. I think we talked about it earlier, but I think it was Senate Bill 1194 in 2022 that mandated that special tax referendums be placed on the general ballot. I would like to see us explore the same with both Section 6.01 and 6.02. I'd also kind of like to get some information, and maybe we should explore the Charter Initiative, Section 6.02 Charter Initiatives. I don't ever remember there being a citizen initiative over the last 12, maybe 20 years.
Ever, as far as I remember, yeah.
And so I'd like to get an idea of what other counties have in place, what percentages they have in place, particularly similarly situated counties, maybe like Orange, some of the South Florida counties, and just kind of compare and contrast, and maybe get an idea of if they've actually had citizens been able to get petitions on the amendments on the ballot over the last 20, 25 years. Just seems like it might be a little too impetitive.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, Commissioner Strickland?
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, I think Attorney Bose was going to go back and look at 4.01, number 4, or excuse me, number 3, that references termination of persons in unclassified positions. And I just need clarification on that because as it reads to me, the county administrator can bring forth termination and the county commissioners can say no.
Yeah, we need clarity on what that is and if it even applies. Because I don't remember that ever happening either.
Yeah, and it's actually a fair point. This is why I always try to pump the brakes to not upset too many apple carts to see how words like that are actually implemented in practice. So we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Pasovich.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In reviewing the topics reviewed and not recommended for charter amendment, I think there's one in particular that I feel is maybe in need of some additional discussion, and that is number 5, where it talks about consolidation of public services. There's some language in their discussion and research that implies that there wasn't enough time to gather the information needed and recommended that the county and municipalities work together to develop ways, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it'd be helpful to at least have a discussion of what happened since then.
That was in the chart. That was in the 2015 Charter Review Report that you're referencing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in their report.
Yeah. To review what wasn't.
Well, to review what was. It implies that there was some work ongoing.
About consolidation of public services, specifically.
Yes. Yeah, so I think it's valid to review that and see where we're at with that, because really I don't think there's anything that I know of, at least with respect to fire service, that has changed significantly.
Right. Okay. Yeah, let's take a look at that, and maybe we can get some historical context of, I don't know if they were talking about EMS and fire, or I don't know what they were talking about.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back, and I see, apparently I drafted a memo 8 years ago, and I can tell you what it probably said, but I'll go back and review it, and we can discuss it at length. I want to give you all just a general caution, though, all right? So we have a fundamental distinction. We talked about the powers of county charters with regard to municipalities, right? And that power to preempt ordinances and so on. We have another provision in the Florida Constitution, Article 8, Section 4. Talks about transfer of powers, all right? Those two provisions, when it comes down to it, are fundamentally at odds. And it eventually ended up at the Florida Supreme Court many years ago. And they said, well, we got to draw a dividing line. And the dividing line they drew was saying county charters can have power over regulatory matters, all right, can preempt with regard to regulatory matters with respect to municipalities. However, charter counties and county charters cannot, through their charter, transfer services, cannot force consolidation of services, okay? So just want to keep that general thing in mind. If the thought is to have a charter amendment that would unilaterally force consolidation of given service X or given service Y, that's going to be a path that's going to have problems. However, you can get into some details and see what you might want to look at.
Yeah, let's figure out what they were looking at and what they were referencing in their report. And then, I mean, it may be internal county processes. I don't know. It could be different departments. I doubt that they were getting into those level of minutia, but you never know. Commissioner Eggers, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just I echo your comment on Todd about the citizen initiative seeming to be pretty restrictive, and we haven't seen that many. There was an effort not too long ago, but it didn't have enough time. They started late, and they just didn't have time to go through it. But I'd like to see that as well. And just want to make sure, Doug, that you captured that discussion on 4.02 and whether or not we want to add any language for the county attorney hiring and firing in terms of specific years.
I do have that, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Commissioner Overend.
My recollection to Commissioner Posevic's question, reading the report to the citizens, is that they didn't have enough time to discuss fire and EMS, and that OPAGA, which is at the state level, the Office of Public Policy, I should know this acronym, Senator DeSegli, they conduct research and studies at the direction of the legislature, the Senate president, and or one other entity. But I believe at the time OPAGA was looking into it, so that might have been another reason that they tabled the fire and EMS discussion.
Okay. Senator DeSegli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add, for a topic of discussion, the requirement of the county administrator to be an elected position.
Okay. Add that to the list. Any other topics we want to add right now? Obviously, this does not preclude the addition of topics later. But I think what we're trying to do, just so we're all on the same page, is we're trying to build out agendas. We're not going to tackle every single one of these topics at a given meeting, but there may be some that Attorney Vose and Mr. Thomas grouped together, and really it's kind of giving them homework on building out our future agendas. Okay? All right. Any other comments, questions, concerns, any other business? Commissioner Overend.
We'll be in Tallahassee the next 2 CRC meetings, I believe.
Will you be able to attend via Zoom, or?
I think so.
Okay, let us know, and if
Okay.
you can, that's acceptable. All right, any other business? Yes.
So your last comment, because obviously Mr. Vose and I are going to have to develop your agendas going forward. Is it okay for us to start to just craft where we think we can pull this off for the next meeting, whether
Yes.
that's feedback with BOCC members and others and some other pieces to
Yes.
go forward? I just didn't know if there were any priorities that we're being driven. I realize we're at the front end of this process. We'll start to get deeper as we
No,
go
I would
into it.
guess that some of the bigger ticket items like county administrator being elected and term limits, I mean, those are things that we're going to be getting feedback on throughout the entire time. So, I mean, if you want to start with the cleanup items and you want to start with, you know, what I would call the low-hanging fruit, that's probably the easiest, and it gives us more time to develop more information and get more feedback on the other topics. Just don't lose track of the topics.
Understood. Understood. Thank
Commissioner
you.
Eggers?
Yeah, and I will, at the next commission meeting, at the end of the meeting, I will talk about that issue, the issue that we just discussed about getting their input, how they want to do it, and then get back to you.
Okay. In the meantime, what I'll do is start to reach out to the county administrator's offices. I'll coordinate with the constitutional officer feedback so we can get that process going too.
County attorney as well.
Yeah, I added attorney because we didn't reference it, but I thought that would be appropriate given the topics discussed tonight.
Anything else for the good of the order? Going once? We are adjourned. Thank you.